Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to my afternoon session. So my name is Trina Maher, and I'm president of Bridging Concepts. And for this next session, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the ideas and concepts that I've had the pleasure of working with different organizations with over a long time in helping them create positive and meaningful partnerships and projects and working relationships with Indigenous people across different parts of the country. But before I begin, I'm located in Barrie, Ontario. And so before I get into the session, I like to do a traditional land acknowledgement. So the land from which I'm speaking with you today from is the territory of the Huron-Wendat, Odawa, and Anishinaabe nations. It is the subject of Treaty 16 of the Upper Canada Treaties and is also known as the Lake Simcoe Purchase of 1815. And so I very much acknowledge all the people who have come before us and who are here with us today, and this is their traditional territory. So let's launch into this. All right. So just briefly, a little bit about the company is I really work in helping organizations, companies, and governments to really, as I said, build those positive partnerships and really helping people shift from just that idea of diversity, but really into inclusion and what does that mean? And that's really what we're going to talk about today in terms of community engagement. And then I also help organizations like Springboard, who I'm very happy to have been asked to be part of this conference today, to help organizations like that who do work directly with, our youth and adults in our communities and helping them get ready for the world of work and world of career. So it's been a pleasure to work on both sides for about 20 years now, and just supporting different organizations throughout that time with professional development, taking part in conferences like this, and just being of service. So I thought I'd share a little bit about me before we launch into the formal part of the presentation. And so as a First Nations woman from Northern Ontario, who also has a background of French in my family, I also like to acknowledge where I come from. And so what you see here on the screen is a picture literally of the lake I grew up on in Northern Ontario. And it's a little town now called Shining Tree, which back in the day, I have included a picture here of the birch trees, which is very much found across that area, because traditionally it was a stopping place for my mother's ancestors, and it was called Wasaquagama, the place where the trees literally shine on the water. So I like to acknowledge where I come from, because I think that's all part of our story. And when we're creating partnerships with new people, and going to meet, whether it's First Nations, Métis, or Inuit people, that's one of the first tips I wanted to share with you today is to share where we come from, because that's often, very important before we get into the business talk and the formal partnership stuff. We need to get to know each other as people. So that's a little bit about where I grew up. Now, as I do work in career, another little teaching for you, which is all part of this conversation really, is looking at, our elders have told us for a long, long time that when you work with young people or adults, when you think back to some of the favorite things that you like to do and some of the things that our little people naturally play with when they're young, it's an important thing to watch for that, because that often tells you who they are and the type of person that they're going to bring into that workplace or that project or that partnership. And so for some of you, you may know what these artifacts are, but for others, they may be new. So I'll just tell you what they are. Those red books are called the Encyclopedia Britannica, which we always had around our house, especially when your father is on the school board and your mother is the truancy officer of a one-room schoolhouse, by the way, with only 8 children. And the other thing that you see there is a typewriter, which was one of my favorite toys that I sort of inherited from my sister growing up. And so I pretty much say I've been consulting and doing this kind of work since about the age of 5. So I've got a long history here. These next photos, when I think about what we're here to talk about today and bringing people together and thinking about how do we build those bridges? How do we come together and make new conversations and really create that place for dialogue, to create meaningful partnerships? That's what I often think about is when I was on my many travels, And hopefully we will all get back to traveling again safe and get to explore some more of our beautiful world. But wherever I've traveled, I've always been interested by bridges, because bridges bring people together and they help, to go on that journey and to bring us to places of new ideas and new concepts and information sharing. And so that's really one of the concepts that I'm going to share with you towards the end of this presentation as my overall metaphor. I also want to encourage you to sort of think outside the box today, because some of the things that I'm going to share with you are going to ask you to do things in a little bit different way. And sometimes we have to step out of our normal and learn what's normal, or what's some protocols, as we say, when we're engaging with Indigenous communities. And so what you see there on the bottom of the screen, that's where I live, in the waterfront here in Barrie. And that's often where my office is in the summer. I think it's a good idea to get out of our normal way of doing things and go to a different space and see how you can be creative and have some conversations. And last but not least, I think we're all here because we're trying to learn different things, and we're trying to get better at everything that we do in our world of work, and whether it's a project or a partnership that you're trying to develop. And so this is one of the sayings from one of my mentors and a group I've been a part of in terms of leadership conversations. And this saying has stuck with me for a very long time. It says, "Don't live the same life 75 years and call it a life," right? We want to get better and learn and continue to grow. And so hopefully that's what a little bit of the information that I can share with you today will help you to do. Now, when we think about inclusion and we think about developing partnerships between Indigenous groups and non-Indigenous groups for a variety of reasons, whether it's for, partnership development in terms of business, or you want to share a program or service that you have, or you want to learn more about what's happening out there in different Indigenous communities and how you can collaborate. Over the years, I've thought about this, and I often say that, in Canada here, we've inherited a bit of a house. And this house, as I show here with this sort of very formal home, it has some good stuff to it. It has some structure. It has, a solid foundation and some solid walls. It has some infrastructure that we can build off of. And these foundations have benefits, because fundamentally in our country, we do have that sense of community and inclusion, and we see that through different initiatives over the years. But we also have to acknowledge that our country comes with a history. And it's only from learning from that history that we can truly move forward and make change and really become that diverse and inclusive society and create those partnerships that are going to matter. Sometimes we have to look back in order to look forward. Now, in these Victorian homes, as I've shown on this screen, they were the best technology at the time. But if you also think about it, and I've taken a tour of some of these houses perhaps in the past, you've noticed that there's many, many rooms and every door on a different room. And so it can kind of feel a little bit isolated, and it separates people. And if you're like me, sometimes you get lost going through so many different rooms. But I think the challenge before us that we can all rise to is to make some renovations. And that's often what we're seeing here as a metaphor as well when we think about this house. We're knocking down those walls and we're opening them up to say, I want to have more people in my kitchen. I want to invite more people into my home and have really interesting conversations and learn about different people. And so now's our time to renovate and make some change. But it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take some different ways of doing things. And so that's what I want to share with you today, is how do we help move our house and create those partnerships from those many different separate rooms into sort of more of an open concept room where we can have good conversations that support meaningful partnerships, create alliances that matter. And, at the end of the day, also, I think it's about what can we all do to support the development of Indigenous talent in Canada so that they can enjoy really meaningful careers. And so that's what I want to talk more about today. I often get asked about, how do we go about community engagement? What are some principles to think about? So I've tried to distill this down into a few that I think will be most helpful for you. The first point is you really need to think about what is it you want to do? What is the purpose of your engagement? Because I can tell you from many years of seeing a variety of partnerships start down that path, that it has to be more than just the right thing to do. I certainly understand that people are empathetic and compassionate and they want to reach out and they want to partner. But if you don't spend the time to really think about what it means to you and your organization, and that you will have the capacity to do it, and that you can articulate really why you want to have that partnership, then it's not really going to start in a good way. So please do take that time to really think about it and plan it out and ask some questions of your team. And as part of your planning process, reach out to those that you want to partner with and ask them some questions. Also, I think it's important to recognize that when we think about partnership development, it's going to take some investments of time and resources, and really for the long term. You know, I often talk about different Indigenous history and where we've come from as a country together. And it's going to take a while to, I think, rebuild some trust that has been lost, and to build some new awareness and to make some place for understanding and coming together in terms of these partnerships. So my other tip is you really need to be in it for the long term. You know, sometimes business or partnerships and organizational development between two organizations can go quickly, or it might take more time. And I think you really need to work together with your potential partners to set that space and to create the pace that is good for everyone. And lastly, I think the last big principle here is to remember that it is a 50-50 opportunity. You know, the offerings or the work that you may want to do is just 50% of the partnership. The other 50% belongs to that other community, that organization that you want to partner with. And you know what? They need to define what they want to bring to the table as well, and how they want to partner. So we need to have that space and have that conversation about what is it that everyone's bringing and what is it that they want to get out of a partnership. It's not just a one-way street. Coming in with a program and saying, I'm here and I want to work with you, that's very nice and very kind. However, you have to be willing to listen to, are they ready to partnership with you? Perhaps they have different priorities in their community. So sometimes a no just means not right now. And so maybe you'll have to go back another time when the community is ready. Next, when we think about defining engagement, these are some of the questions that I often work with organizations through. And these are for you to take away, to think about with your team, perhaps after this session, and to really have a meaningful conversation. Because how does your organization define engagement? How does that engagement and working with different groups, what does it mean? How does it align with your mission, with your values, with your team's approach to doing things? And again, you need to be able to articulate and think about those things and talk about them. The second point around engagement is there's many different types of working with people and organizations. Sometimes it can be a formal partnership, like perhaps you're going to develop a memorandum of understanding or a formal program delivery arrangement. But there's also informal ways to start that partnership. Perhaps it's just doing lunch and learns together, or offering to share some different resources that you may have in an informal way. Again, take the time to get to know one another. Now, the third question, what makes engagement meaningful? It's not only what makes engagement meaningful for your organization and the people that you work with, but you also want to ask the Indigenous community, what means meaningful engagement to them? I was recently working on a project like this, and it is enlightening to hear the other side of the story. Because for many times, and again, I'm just being sort of frank and honest, I've worked with lots of different organizations and lots of different types of communities. And so often we forget to ask the community what they think is meaningful as engagement. And so be proactive and ask them, but more than also that, be willing to listen. because you might just learn something new. You also need to think about what are the resources you have available to support engagement, because is it something that your organization really has the capacity to build in the time to allow staff to go and make these relationships happen and partnerships develop? Or it has to be more than something off the side of someone's desk, because it's going to take commitment and time. And it may, hopefully in the future, we'll get back to traveling and going out and being able to enjoy different events and have people into our spaces. And so think about what are those resources that you can align for that kind of work. And of course, every initiative, I think if we don't know where we're going, we won't know how it was when we get there. So you have to know, how are you going to define that success? Is the success meaning that you have a number of programs developed and you're delivering them in partnership with some communities? Does success mean that you've got one or two really meaningful relationships developed with communities where you're going to learn together for the long term? Or does success mean that maybe you've got participants coming in to your programs and being sponsored? What does that success look like, and how are you going to define it? And again, talk with your Indigenous partner that you want to work with and ask them how they're going to define success and what that timeline realistically is going to look at by everyone. Now, I thought I'd pause here and share a bit of a story, because, that's who we are as Indigenous people. We're storytellers. And I think, I've shared with you some interesting tips and questions, and I want to just take a really brief pause to share with you a story, because the other big concept is making assumptions. And, I've had my own experience with this as well. And it comes right from my family. And so I'm going to share with you this brief story. And this is my mom, Hattie. She's an elder at our community, and she still lives up north near Timmins, Ontario. And she knows that I'm sharing this story with you. We call it the story of Niagara, because we've had our experiences, and she's allowed me to share this story as part of my teaching over the years with different groups, because I think it illustrates quite a few different things. And how the story goes is a little bit like this. So you see here, we're standing in front of the beautiful Niagara Falls, and this was taken some years ago in the summertime. My mom hadn't been to Niagara Falls before, or at least for many, many years. And so when she asked me to take her there, I said, absolutely, I love Niagara Falls. And so we got all ready, we packed up everything, we drove for a few hours, we got to the falls. And for those of you that may have visited there, that, you can't really park at front of the falls. You have to sort of park far away and walk up there. And usually in the summer, in the past, and that day for sure, there was a lot of people, big crowds, and it was quite warm. So you see that we've got our jackets on, because you never know what the weather's going to be like. She's also got her bottle of water. And what you don't see is over her arm, she's got her purse, which for some of you ladies out there, or gents, you may know that you've got aunties and grandmas and others who sort of have like this purse that's like MacGyver. Everything is inside there. Well, she's got one of those. Anyway, so we get out of the vehicle, we walk up to the falls, we go through all of the crowds, we take this one beautiful picture. And if you'll notice in the picture, my mother has a certain hairstyle that, quite frankly, she's had for many, many years. And well, we just call it the poof in our family, because it's got a certain style like that beehive. And after this picture, I was so excited to have her with me at the falls that I thought we should get closer to the falls, because I really wanted to experience, the roar of the thunder of the water, and to really feel that mist on our face and have a whole experience. So we get a little bit closer to the falls. Now I can tell you, if you can imagine what happens when you get really close to the falls and there is a lot of mist and you have a beautiful hairdo. Well, let's just say the two don't mix. So anyway, I look over and she does not look like this anymore in the picture. And I get the look. You know that look that you get when you know you've done something wrong? So following this, I take her to the ladies' room where she can, out of her MacGyver purse, get everything and get back to how she likes herself to be. We went to the restaurant for lunch, and me being curious, I asked her how she was enjoying her trip. I said, "How are you liking the stay at the falls?" And you know what she said to me? She said, "My girl," which again, between my mother and I know I've done something wrong. "My girl, why did you make me get out of the van and walk in this heat and go through all of those crowds? And then we took that nice picture. And then you made me get closer to the falls, and let's not even talk about what you did to my hair." So I had to take a step back. And you know what I learned? The whole trip, I assumed how she would want to see the falls. I had made all the plans the way I would do a trip to the falls. And so even though, she's my mother and we've known each other for a very long time, I still had assumptions. I didn't really stop to ask her how she wanted to see the falls, what she was interested in doing. She was quite happy, and we've gone to Niagara Falls actually just last summer again, but we just drive through and we find, little paths and places to drive around, and she can see much more. So that's part of the teaching for today is when you're working with any group, always ask them what their point of view is, what they want to do, how they may have a protocol or want to approach planning an event or having a conversation. Because as we all have assumptions, we all have unconscious biases. We have all come to do things in ways that are comfortable and familiar to us. And we need to change and think about the other person. So that's my story about the falls. And now I'm going to give you a couple more tips. So as I said in the beginning, I wanted to share with you a concept, and I work a lot around using my medicine wheel as my way of teaching. So I often think about things in terms of my mind, my body, my spirit, the emotion, and how I'm going to approach the work that I do. But I also wanted to marry that with this concept of building a bridge, because that's really what our work is all about. So when I think about creating partnerships, for example, or going about any of the work that I do, I really think first about those two anchors of the bridge. One of the anchors is my side of our organizational values and reasons for engagement that we've talked about. The other anchor is, what is that vision of success going to look at? Once we have those two anchors, then we can build the rest of the bridge. So it starts with the spirit. And this is sort of a wrap up of everything I've just talked about in this session. You have to know, what is your why, your meaningful opportunity to why you want to do this work, and how is it meaningful to you and the community. Then you have to think about it and do some planning and ask those questions that I mentioned earlier, and listen to the responses that other people are giving you and help that create that plan and that strategy that you're looking for before you can actually then move into what we call the physical part, to actually then going on the journey and creating those engagement opportunities, whether it's webinars like this and you're going to have to do meetings online, or getting out to a community hopefully in the future. But we must have the reasons and think about it before we start just doing the work. And finally, for my last tip, I think it's about the emotional side of it, because creating partnerships is creating relationships. And so sometimes we're going to make mistakes and sometimes we're going to have highlights. So take the moment with your team to debrief the successes, to learn from what's going well, but also be willing to say, well, where did we not go right, and how can we create some other opportunities for change and work through the challenges in the future. So lastly, just some tips on a good beginning. Again, every community has its own ways of doing things and protocols. So you want to learn those local nuances so that you can create a strategy that's right for that particular group that you want to work with. And always remember that you are a guest and act accordingly. Sometimes it's helpful to seek an advisor or someone from the community to give you tips before you go there. And often, as I said many times, have the patience and let the community set the pace for the conversation. Some other last tips, and again, this handout will be available for you after the conference, But you also want to make sure that as you develop your communications, it's with the Indigenous community group in mind, and be clear about who you want to engage with, whether it's local or national or very specific. And again, there's many spaces and places of organizations and networks now that are developed by Indigenous people that you can partner with and link with and come out and learn about more about how to engage with us. And lastly, you want to make sure that your team is culturally aware and competent before you send them out. So with that, that's a wrap. I just wanted to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and share with you some of these insights. I hope that they're helpful. And just as it says on this last slide here, I encourage you all to step into the power of your humanity, to embrace it and perform and create some really good partnerships. So thank you very much for this opportunity today. And that's that. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think we have like a couple of minutes. After that, we're just going to wrap up. Oh, I do see a question. Oh, you're welcome. Miigwech Amanda. Thank you. What is my why? Good question. My why is it's definitely to see, Indigenous talent have those meaningful careers across Canadian workplaces. That's really all the work that I do ties into that vision. And so that's my why, is to bring people together and create places that everyone feels that they're valued and that they matter. So thank you very much for that question.